Hello everyone. If this is your first time attending my channel, welcome. If you've been here before, thank you for coming again. Today we're going to be covering the two-cycle theory, two-cycle engine. Right here we have a cylinder and a piston. Of course, your piston moves up and down inside the cylinder. It gives you the intake of your fuel and air. It's a mixture. And in your two-cycle, you have to have a mix, which normally optimal mixture is going to be 50-to-1. What does 50-to-1 mean? It means that you have 50 parts of fuel to 1 part of oil. Better way of saying it is 50 droplets of fuel to 1 drop of oil. That's a 50-to-1 mix ratio. It's optimal ratio. How does that keep it? We don't have, there's no oil reservoir down at the bottom. That 1 droplet of oil to every 50 droplets of fuel, that is your lubrication property. Remember, oil does, it lubes, it seals, it cleans, it protects, and it cools. There's 5 different properties, 5 different purpose of that oil. So every time you put fresh fuel in a two-cycle engine, you're getting a new oil change, so to speak. So how do we manage to use minimal oil and still keep it from seizing up? Well, all we need, we happen to cut this, we did a cutaway so you could see the inside of a cylinder. The blue is your cool side, your intake. This is your carburetor side. Of course, the red is the exhaust. Here's your muffler on this side. Anyways, what we do is, all we need is a thin film of oil in between your piston rings, piston skirt, and your cylinder to keep this thing lubricated and have the sealing properties that it needs to work. Here's the way it operates. When your piston is in the upstroke, move it up, you expose the intake. Fuel comes in, it goes to the bottom. There's a negative pressure down here which pushes fuel in through the carburetor, and it goes down to the bottom of the crankcase down here. And then as your piston goes down, you notice that we cap off with the piston skirt, we cap off the intake port. Essentially, your piston skirt is serving as a shutter or a valve, if you will, and it closes that off. But notice that it exposes your exhaust tract. So now, what happens is the fuel and air mixture that went down to the bottom of the crankcase gets pushed up through what they call transfer ports. So as your piston goes in the downstroke, we create a positive pressure down there, and you push fuel mixture up to the top. And once we start compressing that charge, there's proper ignition that happens through your spark plug. And at top dead center, or TDC, it fires off through the help of a flywheel and a coil that gives you charge. You got primary and secondary windings in here, and you ignite that charge. So once we ignite the charge, it pushes the piston down, because now we have expanded gases. And once we expand the gases, that's our power stroke. So basically this guy, there's 4 strokes to every engine. There's intake, compression, power, and exhaust, in that order. So when we're bringing this guy up, we've got intake, we got compression, ignition through the spark plug, and down on the way down, we have the power stroke and exhaust. So we have intake, compression, power, and exhaust in a 2-stroke engine. And all this happens through 1 complete revolution of your crankshaft. Your crankshaft has the connecting rod that's moving this guy up and down. up and down, connecting rod. Now, so here's your crankshaft, and what one revolution means is this guy, we have a keyhole right here that contains your key, which is your timing. When this guy does one complete 360, it completed the 2 cycles that it needs for the 4 strokes to be completed. Intake, compression, power, and exhaust with one complete revolution of the crankshaft. This particular crankshaft is it's what they call a half crank. Notice that there's no, you got the flywheel and the coil are going to be on one side. Notice you don't have a flywheel end on this side. Why would they do that? This is a lot cheaper to manufacture. Your professional models, your equipment, your Echoes, Husqvarna, your STIHLs, and other units out there give you a complete crank on both sides. You got the PTO side of the crankshaft and the flywheel side. These you're going to find in the lesser models. You know, your weed eaters, your Troy-Bilts, McCulloughs, if they're still around. And a couple of other units, not talking bad about them, but these do give you more vibration. So when you go buy a trimmer, a string trimmer, and some people call them weed eaters, but weed eaters a brand. Weed eaters, the green ones. They use these a lot as well. They're a little bit least expensive or lesser expensive to manufacture. That's why you pay maybe $150 for this trimmer, where the other ones are going to start at $350 and up. You also have, anytime you have the exhaust exposed and the intake sealed off, when you get those gases out, some of the, notice that your intake, the exhaust, the transfer port begins to crack open right about there. So as your scavenging process, which means your exhaust, it's moving the exhaust out. That's what scavenging means in our industry. Once you expose that port ever so slightly, now you got that charge coming in, and the fresh fuel is helping push out the exhaust. Essentially, what becomes your scavenging process. Unfortunately, it happens so fast that we lose about 30% of our fuel, our fresh fuel that's in your fuel reservoir right out the tailpipe, which is the reason why we have, on the exhaust side, we have the exhaust screens. There's a screen that goes inside the exhaust port to help capture that 30% of fuel that's coming out, because it's got oil in it. And that oil essentially becomes little tiny balls of fire and could create a fire out in dry grass and what have you, which is why that screen is in the back. They call it a fire screen. Of course, there's other names for it, but we'll call it a fire screen because that's what it is. It's a fire screen protector. We have, in this case, we have 2 rings. We have two sets of rings that go inside the ring grooves, which is really, really great. You don't need 3 like you have on the 4-stroke engines, because all you need these guys is to create compression and keep that piston running nice and clean and straight inside the cylinder. Also, what the other thing that the rings do for you, they take the heat off of the piston and they transfer it onto the cylinder walls, which normally this material is called Nickel. That's they normally put that in there. It's very resilient to hot, extremely hot conditions. And once we get the heat to the cylinder, it goes out to the atmosphere through what they call the cooling fins. All these rib lines right here are called cooling fins. They start a little bit thick, then they kind of taper down. So, you know, if you heat up something as thin as a razor blade, it almost cools down immediately. Well, these guys start a little thick, and once they get to the end over here, they're really thin, just like a razor blade. And therefore, getting that heat out into the atmosphere, keeping the heat away from your piston, your rings, and your inside cylinder. We will keep you posted with more material. Keep in mind that there's still units out there, like the people that manufacture the half crank, that have one piston ring on it. So one ring versus two. Remember, the ring removes heat, keeps it moving, sliding up and down smooth inside your cylinder. And it also creates higher compression. So every time you buy a lesser unit, just remember that's what's going to occur. It's lesser because they skip a few critical steps or procedures that it's to be cost effective. But just remember, when you're buying say $150 trimmer versus a $350 one, more than likely you're going to get single piston ring, half crank. We'll keep you posted. My name is Pete Gonzalez, and thank you for joining me. I will be running more videos, more for you to help you in your process on the bench, or you're doing this at home. It's a great industry to get into. I've been at it for almost 40 years now, and I thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience, and we'll keep you in touch. Thank you very much. Y'all have a great day.